So, welcome back from the break, and we're gonna start directly with Gavin Littleboy and Chad Hills from our CX practice in US.
Yes.
And you will present automating network compliance. Thank you so
Yes,
much.
ma'am.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Automating Network Compliance with NSO. If you noticed in the agenda, we had a little bit longer title, so the only way we could fit the title on the slide was to shorten it. My name is Chad Hill. I'm a customer delivery architect with our CX organization, and I work with our customers designing and developing multi-domain networks and automation. Been doing NSO since 2016, and yeah, it's great to be here.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. My name's Gavin Littleboy. I'm a technical leader here at Cisco. So I just came in from Colorado, where I enjoy skiing and hiking, and I also get to work on a team dedicated to automation in our Cisco CX organization. Now, Chad and I have partnered with many customers on their automation journeys, and today we're very excited to talk to you about compliance.
All right, and so Gavin and I, we work with our US public sector organization, and for pretty much our whole careers, we've been trying to solve this problem of compliance, starting initially with manual remediations and checks to dedicated tooling with NSO and custom actions and services. And now we've been working with our customers and the NSO team on how we can help simplify compliance leveraging NSO with out-of-the-box features. So with that, let's go ahead and dive in. And today, our goal is everyone will walk away from this session that will know how to use NSO compliance and define the compliance intent and be able to do auditing, reporting, and remediation. All right, so today's agenda. Let's go ahead and we'll initially define what is network compliance and the patterns we see with compliance. We have identified many different patterns over the years, and we want to share with you some frameworks and processes that we use to identify compliance intent. We will then dive into NSO with compliance and some of the new features we worked with the NSO team. And then Gavin will walk through real-world examples first of how to create compliance templates, and then a PCERT response, which we've all probably have gone through that exercise at some point in our careers. And then finally, we'll talk about remediation and services and how we can deal with compliance with those in NSO. All right, so I'm going to start with an analogy. Everyone has probably taken a lift, or depending where you're at in the world, an elevator. What you typically see when you stand in the elevator is a certificate of an inspection, and this is normally done yearly. There's weight limits, passenger capacity certifications, compliance with standards and regulations to ensure that the lift is safe. And then typically owners of these lifts have to provide the logs of anything that broke and the repairs that were done. And then also, is there any type of maintenance that is done proactively to ensure that the lift is operating optimally? And then, of course, the daily inspections, the continuous checks, and ensuring that the lift is doing what it was built to do. We can learn a lot about lifts and how we look at network compliance. We do automation for a purpose here, which is safety, security, reliability, brand. All these things are very important to us when we think about network compliance. So let's go ahead and dive in. All right, so what is involved with network compliance? We have the typical things that we look for: end-of-life equipment, code versions, vulnerabilities, PCERTs, and then there's other things that network operators care about. Network standards such as naming conventions, patterns and IP addressing schemes, and then organizational standards, and then industry regulations and laws and data sovereignty requirements that we have to abide by to ensure our networks are compliant. And there's, of course, a lot of other things that go into network compliance, and then things outside of it. For today's session, we are going to focus on network compliance itself. Okay, so these are some of the patterns that we feel are super important to share with you all of how to identify a good compliance check in defining what the actual intent is to ensure we're checking things accurately. These are 3 patterns we look for, whether it's in the configuration tree, and in most recently in NSO 6.5, the operational tree. And it allows us to break down compliance intents through match type, match logic, and match scope. Let's dive into each one of these. All right, so match type. These are my favorite. Exact matches, the low-hanging fruit. In this case, logging user info, either the line of configuration is there or is not. And if it is there, it is an exact match. Next, we have configurations where it might change based on device or role, so we use variables. In this case, we want to variabilize a VLAN underneath the interface to make sure we're using a disabled VLAN that is invalid. Finally, one of the great things with compliance is we might not always necessarily need to match the exact values, but we can express it through some regular expression pattern that, in this case, line VTY 0 through 4, we want the session timeout to be 5 minutes or less. Okay, match logic. As we know, configurations, when it's present, service password encryption means it's enabled. If you're familiar with iOS, you know that sometimes for disabled, we put a no in front of it. It hurts my head a little bit for some of the data modelers in the room of how you would handle such a thing. Fortunately, we have NEDs to handle that for us. And then we have absent. The configuration in the running config must not exist in order to be compliant, meaning that that feature is disabled. And then finally, comparison. In this case, there's some logic to it where at least 2 logging servers must be configured in order to match the compliance intent. Okay, finally, match scope. So depending where in the configuration tree, we have global. In this case, service timestamps is a global configuration. We have nested, where in this example, no IP redirects is a configuration we're matching for underneath an interface. We have lists, where we want to match some value within a list, in this case, a deny statement underneath an ACL. And then finally, a section, where multiple lines of configuration must exist and match in order for that feature to be enabled. Okay, compliance and NSO. So we work with a lot of our customers, and we see a lot of time and investment in separate auditing tools to check if the network is compliant, which is typically completely separate from the configuration management tool. And we found a lot of inherent challenges with that. Some of the challenges we found is if I have multiple baselines or versions, I ask the question, what version is my network on? Did it deploy? When I ran my remediation script, is my configuration actually remediated in the network? And then we have hundreds of scripts for these remediation validations of create, update, and delete, and having to maintain all those depending the different scenarios. And then I need to audit and make sure, again, that the remediation was effective and in the network. And then if something does not work out, I need the ability to roll back. So we've found a lot of inherent value when we think of these patterns with just NSO by itself. Being able to track configuration state, my service intent, and comparing what is actually on the network and my actual configuration services. The transactional integrity, that I know when I actually push something, that is it is indeed in the network. Service packages and FastMap and managing all the lifecycle using CRUD. And then what we're going to be talking about more in depth is compliance reporting and how I can audit a lot of the compliance checks within my network. And then the built-in rollback capabilities. Okay, so one question we hear a lot is, why do we need compliance checks? I want us to think about two personas here. We have the NetOps persona, which is really focused around optimizing the network for design, scale, and performance, and ensuring the network is running smoothly. And normally that intent is done within the service intent. And then the compliance intent for the net or the SecOps persona, which is focused around the security and optimizing around responding to threats and vulnerabilities within the network. So really, the service intent is the actual configuration that is deployed into the network, and the compliance intent is the guardrails that could span across multiple services potentially, or parts of the configuration where services are not checking or managing. And then we have some feedback loop once we do those checks back into the service intent or some remediation process to make sure we're compliant with the network. So that brings me to compliance templates. As you all are aware, or if you've been tracking within NSO 6, this was introduced in NSO 6.1, and we've been working with the NSO team. All those patterns that we've identified, working with customers and identifying all the different things we need to use to match all these compliance checks, there's significant amount of enhancements through the use of tags that allow us to tackle all these patterns. And then obviously the optimization around auditing, being able to use regular expression. There's a lot of power here. And if you use device templates today, there's actually an action in NSO where you can migrate all your device templates to compliance templates. All right, shout out to the Web UI team. I think this is the revamp of the revamp. And one important thing that we've realized with our network operators is they need an easy, intuitive interface to see what's actual violations within the network. So one of the great things here is we can export to many different formats. If I want to send some of this upstream into some situational awareness dashboard and being able to correlate compliance checks with the network, and then being able to define the scope across services, devices, device groups, and then being able to run against compliance templates as well as services. All right, so we'll switch over to the demo, and Gavin's going to quickly walk through the new web UI of compliance reporting. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and go into the compliance report definitions. This is where we actually define all our compliance reports and all the templates that are associated to those reports. And these can be ran over and over again with new report run title names. And then if we navigate under report results, here's all the results of all our different runs. So we'll go ahead and click into one of these. And as we can see here, we have the run date of when this report was ran, the amount of compliant and non-compliant devices. And one of the valuable things right here is being able to quickly see which devices are non-compliant, viewing the details, and then exactly seeing what the non-compliant configuration is that we found. All right, thanks, Gavin. We'll go ahead and swap back to the slides. Okay, so now I'm going to hand it over to Gavin, and he's going to deep dive in compliance templates and how to use these tags.
All right, so good afternoon again, everybody. Let's talk about compliance templates. Now, this is configuration that is going to live within NSO. And compliance templates are our built-in blocks for our compliance reports. And compliance reports are important because, one, they tell us if we're compliant or non-compliant, but also they tell us maybe when we're done. Now, Chad and I have worked with a lot of customers on their automation journey, and we've had the opportunity to see many different automation tools out there. We've seen open source tools, vendor tools, programming language libraries, and something that we hear from our customers, especially their management, is what do we have to learn now? So our premise to you is that compliance templates are simple. That is to say, if you can write a device configuration, you can write a compliance template. So in brief, a compliance template is made up of a name, a device type, optionally a tag, and we're going to go into some details about that, and then finally the compliant configuration that you want to match. So let's walk through some examples. In this first example, these are all going to be for iOS XE. In this first example, we're looking to ensure that password encryption is enabled. Now recall those match patterns that we talked about earlier. For this, we have an exact enabled global configuration. To build this template, we simply have to provide the configuration. We commit our template, and then something really nice about the NSO CLI is that we can run a check right there to test out the template we just created. So in this case, we run it against an XE0 device, and we find a violation, and it even shows us the configuration that we're missing. Pretty neat. Let's do another example. For this example, our intent is to disable the boot P service. Our match pattern is exact. Absent, this is one of those configurations that is disabled when we don't find the command in iOS. And this is at the global level. Similar workflow, we create the compliance template, but now we're going to use one of those tags to add the absent behavior. And to do that, we use the tag add command followed by the full path of the configuration element, and then we choose our keyword being absent. We commit this template, run our check. In this case, no violation. Looks good. This next example has to do with a configuration item called trust points. This may not be a common configuration for a lot of our customers, but when it comes to compliance, if something is common or uncommon, it can be important. So our intent here is to ensure that our trust points are using a valid enrollment URL. If we look at our match criteria again, we have a variable enabled nested match. We build our configuration, and you can see now that we can use variables inside of the compliance configuration. We commit, and now when we run our check, we have to provide values for those variables. We found a violation. Looks like we have a typo. We were expecting example.com, but we found example.org. There's a problem. Our intent isn't quite right. What we actually want to do is evaluate against all trust points to ensure they're using the correct enrollment URL. Let's make that update. So here we've updated our intent, and we've also updated our match criteria. We've added regular expressions. So if you look at our template, instead of using a variable for trust point, we're now matching any trust point using a regular expression. We commit, run our check again, And now we found a second trust point in our configuration. We're still not done. We didn't quite get it right. If you look closely at the second trust point, it's actually using a different method for its enrollment. It's using terminal, which is actually a valid configuration in this case. So we have to do another update to see if we can get this compliance template right. So now we've updated our intent to say all trust points that use URL for enrollment must use a valid URL. Our match criteria is the same here. And something we've done here is we slightly changed our workflow. We've now saved our template as an XML representation of the config, and we're going to make our edits in a text editor. Now we do this because it gives you a slightly better perspective of the configuration, and it lets you place these tags precisely where you want. So here, the tag we're applying is called allow empty, and we're going to put it in two places. The first is on the trust point. And what this means is if we don't find any trust points, it's actually a compliant device. We're not enforcing that this trust point configuration exists. We also place this tag on the URL element. Because again, if we're not using URL for enrollment, it is a compliant state. But if we are, then we have to match our valid enrollment URL. We can load merge this back into NSO, commit, and run our quick check again. We're right back where we started. Okay, we have one more compliance template to get through, after which everybody in this room who's paid attention will be an expert. So in this example, this is for a strict match. And our intent is to secure the line aux port of a router. This port isn't used by most customers anymore, perhaps had a modem or something in the past connected to it. But for now, they want an exact match to disable the port. And it's actually going to be a section of configuration. It takes multiple lines to secure this config. We're going to again use the XML workflow. And if you look in the blue, the tag that we're going to use is strict, and we're going to apply it to the aux line. This means everything within those two XML tags has to match exactly. We are disabling the exec service, and we are restricting our transport options. We're going to load this into NSO and run our check. I'm very happy we used that strict tag here because we found some other config. We found a password and we found a login feature. Without strict, we'd have to enumerate every configuration option under line aux. Instead, we defined our intent and the compliance check took care of it for us. Everybody here is now an expert in compliance templates. Next, let's shift to a practical example. How do we respond to PCerts, and how can this compliance feature be useful in that case? So our PCert organization releases security advisories. This is an actual security advisory that we're going to go through. And both Chad and I have spent some time working with network operations. We've been on the floor. We felt the chaos, the real-time environment. Everybody's busy. And when these security advisories drop, it's a scramble. There's leadership who's calling to the floor asking for updates. We have security calling to the floor asking, when are things going to be patched? When are we upgrading? And on top of that, NetOps has everything else that they're dealing with. So in our response to a PCert, there's two key pieces of information that we want to find out. The first is the scope of the vulnerability. What platforms are impacted and which software versions? And the second part is what configuration is a condition for vulnerability? And this is the part where compliance reporting can really help us out. So working through this example, Impacted platforms is the Cisco 8000, as well as the Cisco NCS 5500. Multiple versions of iOS XR. For the configuration item, you are only impacted if you have an egress ACL applied to your interface, either IPv4 or IPv6. So let's use our new skills to write a compliance template for that. Recall our match conditions. In this case, we want to use a regular expression to match any IPv4 or IPv6 ACL. Next, we want to use the absent condition. In our case, a compliant configuration is an interface without an ACL applied. And finally, this is a nested match. We are trying to find ACLs applied underneath an interface. So to build this template, we first define interface and then gigabit Ethernet. If there's other types of interfaces we have, we could enumerate those here. For this example, we'll stick to gigabit Ethernet. And notice we're using the tag allow empty. Our intent isn't to enforce that gigabit Ethernet exists, but if it does exist, let's keep going with our compliance. We use a regular expression to match all IDs, and then you can see we're specifying both IPv4 or IPv6 ACLs. We're going to use the tag absent on the access group configuration. Our direction is egress, and for the ACL name, we're going to use a regular expression to match any name. We load this into NSO. You can see NSO calculates this XPath for us. And next, we're going to write a compliance report for this. So a compliance report consists of a name, a list of devices. So in this case, recall our conditions. We only want to match on NCS 5500 and Catalyst 8000 routers. So we use device groups for that. And then we specify the device template that we just wrote. Let's run this report. So there's many ways to consume the results of these reports. We heard about the export options earlier. There's text, HTML, XML, even database formats. And we also saw a quick run through of the web UI. This is a very friendly interface to drill in and find out exactly where your problems are. And in this case, XR0 is potentially vulnerable, and we can see the egress ACL applied there. So next, I'm going to turn it back over to Chad. He's going to tell us more about remediation and also how this compliance feature can be helpful for NSO services.
Thanks, Gavin. By the way, we have multiple 8000 families. That was Cisco 8000, so it gets confusing sometimes. All right, so now you've seen compliance templates, which are really optimized around that auditing capability. As you all know, there's device templates that are available from a remediation standpoint, where maybe I'm not using services, and I could define a template with variables and be able to apply it one time to the network, obviously not using FastMap here. And then we also have service packages, which we've come to really like. The full CRUD capabilities, full lifecycle management, leveraging FastMap. The key thing with services here is my compliance check is my service intent, meaning I'm checking if the service is out of sync, and if it's out of sync, then I show you what the delta is. Let's go ahead and define a service compliance report. So in this case, the same construct, we create the compliance report name, we specify a service check and the service type with the XPath to the service. We go ahead and run our compliance report. As we can see here, our service is out of sync. We're missing NTP authenticate, whether somebody removed it or it was missing from the configuration. Our service now is non-compliant. So like I said, what if we don't use services? One of the workflows is we can create device templates quickly. Here we can create the actual device template name, the net ID, the configuration that we want to push to the device. Directly, we can apply that template to the device itself. Use the commit dry run to preview our changes and make sure that it's changing what we want to actually push. And then we go ahead and run our compliance report, and we see that we are compliant again. But in this case, we have a NSO service, so let's take advantage of it. So when the service is out of sync, as we all know, what one useful benefit here, we can do a redeploy dry run, which shows us what actual configuration of the service intent needs to get pushed into the network. And if the dry run looks good, I will go ahead and do redeploy, and then rerun my service compliance report, and then now I see I'm back in sync. All right, so finally, Gavin and I work with customers doing large-scale compliance projects. Imagine hundreds of checks, thousands of devices. As you can imagine, it could probably be a full-time job managing compliance reports. So we thought, well, why not take advantage of FastMap within NSO and create a compliance service to manage all my compliance reports? So a lot of our customers, they like having reusable variables. So in this package, we can define reusable template variables. We also can create compliance template groups and group them. In this case, we have multiple templates that is part of iOS XE services. And then we define our rule groups where we can have multiple rules that are reused, in this case, an XE baseline. And then the compliance service itself uses a policy construct. So we can define what the policy is, the policy scope. In this case, it's a single device. I can apply rule groups for inheritance. I can define all my rules that I want to apply to this device, and then the templates that apply to those rules. And then the commit of this actually creates all the compliance reports for us. One useful benefit here is if I'm using the same variable across multiple compliance reports, I can quickly go in here and update the variables in the service policy, in the compliance service policy, redeploy it, and it'll update all my compliance reports for me. So go ahead and check it out. We made this open source on NSO Developer GitLab for you all to be able to leverage. We also have examples of compliance templates and all the patterns we discussed today if you want to go ahead and try this yourself. Give it a try, give us feedback, some thoughts, ways we can improve it, and maybe some other use cases. Okay, so in summary, we talked about auditing capabilities and compliance templates and services and how we can leverage those to check the compliance intent. We talked about the process and a framework using the patterns and how those map to the tags and the new NSO features in the compliance templates. We talked about the new revamped web UI for reporting and being able to have actual visibility into the non-compliant configurations in my network. And then we talked about remediation, using device templates and services. And then one useful thing we found as well is, something like a golden config service, where we can check baselines and then audit the baselines and leveraging the benefits of FastMap. So all in all, what makes compliance sometimes could be boring, but it's exciting for us because we're taking the power of automation and NSO and simplifying compliance for all. Thank you.
I think you guys had a poll as well.
Yes, we do have a poll. We'd love to hear what you all use.
All right. Anything you want to add?
Yeah, no, this is awesome. I'm glad we're at a Developer Day event, and NSO is the #1 on the poll. So hopefully you saw some use with the compliance templates. One thing I'll say with the different personas, as we know, with dedicated tooling, it's always chasing that intent. So we see a lot of benefits of leveraging a unified platform for both the compliance intent and service intent. So hopefully this session is useful.
Do we have any questions from the audience? What do you manage for network compliance? That was not the whole question, I think. Yeah, we have a live question here. Do we have a microphone for Roque?
Hi, guys. No, great presentation. I think you made a comment early on 6.5 that it's just out that there's a new feature that we can do also state compliance. I don't know if you spent 30 seconds on it, what that state compliance will mean and what use cases we have.
Yeah, absolutely. We didn't have enough time to put this in the session, but you can recompile your NEDs. Sorry, am I still on? Oh. You can recompile your NEDs and use operational state now. And it's the same structure as compliance templates. You have the operational state that's modeled, and you can write compliance template checks against that operational state.
Yeah, just to give you more flavor, some of the use cases customers were interested was like, do we need to run inventory checks? I want to check that, you know, do I have that device? So what some of the state change can be, for example, an inventory or a route table. Do I have a route in my routing table? So you can use that to check your routing table, for example. All right.
Yeah, definitely. And you have the live status, and then the different, depending on the netconf capabilities of the device, you have some structured operational state. So if there's a call to retrieve inventory data, you can write a compliance template against that. That's a great use case.
Hi, great work. Looks great. My question is, we look at this organization called CIS, Center for Internet Security, and it has a bunch of benchmarks. And it also contains benchmarks for Cisco routers. And we want to comply to their specifications. So I don't know what you're thinking of developing more features for in future, but is there a way to generate these configurations based on such benchmarks? Because, or else I have to do it.
Yeah, so we're in the US public sector team, so there's some standards that apply to our federal customers. So yes, we are doing some of that work. You can definitely, if you want someone to help you with it, obviously reach out to your CX team. But yeah, I don't know, Gavin, if you want to share, you have some interesting things you're working on.
I do. So our team tried to do this AI assistance. And what we found is it wasn't that great. But it was good enough that it made us move faster. So we've worked on some processes where we start with compliance policy. We break that down into technical requirements, which we then break out into device CLI. But we still have our SMEs kind of in the review process for that. And they're still a little busy with it. But it's getting better, is the answer.
Thank you.
So we also have a question from Niklas. Can you write compliance reports for delete behavior For example, if a service uses pre-mods, but you may not have previously.
Yeah, so I think you're indicating, so in device templates, we had a delete tag, which would mean that we want to remove that configuration. In the case of compliance templates, I think the question is, we now just use the absent tag, which means that the configuration is deleted or does not exist on that running config. So, yeah.
All right, any more questions? If not, thank you so much, Gavin and Chad.
Thank you.